Hi, Lifey. Okay, you can get started, I guess. Just keep on going. Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started. I'm not used to microphones. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here today, and thank those of you that are watching live and those that will be watching later. I hope to make it informative for you. I am basically just finished my 20th year in real estate. I started in January of 1997, and so most of my perspective is going to be from my 20-year history of doing this. And I also am nearing the completion of my 10th year as being the broker and owner of Boulevard Realty, and that I'm very proud of. And we've learned a few things over the last decade also that hopefully I can share with you. We are very fortunate at Boulevard Realty for where we work and what we do, and we were very fortunate in 2017. We had a very good year. We were up 21% as a company. We had set a goal of $200 million, and we got to $210 million in sales. That's with 60 agents, which is about the same number we've had over the last decade, and as a result of the 20 employees that support those 60 agents. So we had a very good year, and want to continue to build on that momentum, and want to thank the people that trust us with their homes and their home search. And we're very grateful for the people over the last 20 years who give us the opportunity to do what it is that we do, and we hope that we do it with a sense of pride and ethics and knowledge and integrity. And that's our commitment to you, is that we're going to continue to do those things. If you follow real estate, like most of you do, most people would say 2017 was a good year. The headlines out there were very positive. If you follow the Business Journal, you follow the Chronicle, you follow Nancy Sarnoff, you follow any of these deals, the basic headlines, the Houston Association of Realtors press release was positive. The Greater Houston Builders Association press release was positive. The Apartment Association was positive. The commercial world was relatively positive. So the headlines for 2017 kind of set the stage for what will happen in 2018. And we're going to talk about 2017 also as a whole and what really happened there. So beyond those headlines, we want to talk, and I am not an economist. We are not going to talk about the economy. Ted Jones is an economist, and I encourage you to go and listen to him. I am just a realtor and a real estate professional, but I know a little bit about Houston and how the economy impacts real estate as a whole. For a backdrop, remember that what goes up must come down, and we have been in a prolonged period of economic prosperity since the Great Recession. And this is kind of showing periods of prosperity and periods of recession, and it is cyclical. You know, we were very fortunate in Houston, Texas, during the Great Recession of 2008, 9, and 10, that we were not impacted as much as other cities across the nation. Oil was relatively high. The oil economy kept us better off than the average city across America. So we didn't even feel the impact, not to diminish the recession and what happened there, but we didn't have the same impact as Phoenix did, or Las Vegas did, or Mississippi did. We were slightly insulated from it. We, of course, had a greater impact when oil declined, from $110 a barrel to $26 a barrel. We felt it a lot more than other cities across the nation. So we've had this prolonged period of economic prosperity, and there will be some correction. The stock market of the last week is kind of an indication there that from time to time it's going to correct itself there. But more important than that, we have some other things. So from my perspective, you must realize the city of Houston is a very large city. And we need to think of it in micro real estate regions or whatever. So the city of Houston, compared to other cities, we just have some slides here to show you, compared to Paris, that's Paris compared to Houston. This is San Francisco compared to Houston. Just a couple more. The 5 boroughs of New York, well within almost, definitely within the Beltway. And all of London, just for perspective there. So it's a very large city when you talk about Houston real estate. And even more important, the Houston Association of Realtors reports numbers on a much broader scale than Houston. So when you hear the Houston Association of Realtors producing numbers, they're talking about items selling in Galveston, Fort Bend County, Montgomery County, and in reality, they confirmed again today when they released numbers, it's now a statewide MLS. So sales in El Paso and Austin are reported on the Houston Association of Realtors numbers when they talk about the number of sales. Those numbers are insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but they are there. So we must not just rely on HAR's statistics in what it has to say. And going back to the general breakup of sales of statistics, the one you were just at, if you look at the breakdown of sales from HAR, if we measured at 400,000 and above, the 400,000 sales to a million make up only 16% of all the sales, which means 84% of all sales reported under the Houston Association of Realtors are under $400,000. And while you may be able to find that in Tomball, it's not that easy to find houses 400,000 and under inside the 610 loop, and barely able to find those houses inside the Beltway. So we're going to focus much of our conversation today really on just the city of Houston and even the inner city of Houston, and not all of the Houston Association of Realtors. And we're going to talk about more of these micro regions as a whole. So statistically, you will see that the $750,000 to $900,000 range only makes up 6% of all sales in the Houston Association of Realtors. And $1 million, while they are up, make up a very 1.9% of all the sales are over $1 million. But we like to focus on some of those numbers because the paychecks are a little bigger at $1 million than they are at $200,000. But that's just kind of showing you the breakdown of those numbers and how it is. If we look at the summary from HAR of the sales, of course it was positive. All indicators were positive. The number of sales was the greatest number of sales in the history of the Houston Association of Realtors, 79,000, an increase of 3%. The dollar volume was the largest it's ever been in the history of the Houston Association of Realtors. The average price and median price were near record-breaking, if not record-breaking also. So all indicators, the headlines themselves, were very positive, which is a very good thing. People buy houses if they feel like the economy is going strong and real estate is going strong. No one wants to buy a house for $500,000 if they think they can buy it for $450,000 in 6 months, right? Everyone wants the assumption that prices will continue to increase. But we do want to break this down for you and give you a little snippet about how it really works for the year as a summary. A lot of us know we have an office in the Heights. We sell millions of dollars of houses outside the Heights, but everyone's going to ask the question. So in the Heights alone, it saw an increase, but it was a modest increase, 1.7% increase in the number of sales in the Heights. But what I want us to look at, because it leads to some of my conclusions later, I want you to look at the number of new homes that we're selling. And the number of those new homes is down fairly significant in the Heights, 14.6% of new homes. That's the decrease in new homes. And that's because the economy was not so strong as oil was declining. We did not start a lot of new homes in 2016 or 2017. You can't sell what they don't build, okay? If you don't build them, you can't sell them. While the demand is high, the supply is low for new homes in Area 9. The resale market made up the difference there, and it produced fairly well. I like the East End. I like the area on the other side of the George R. Brown, basically all the way to the 610 loop over there. And so they saw a nice increase over in the East End. And these are predominantly single-family homes we're talking about, not just land or condos or anything. But the East End saw a nice increase. They saw an increase in new construction. They saw an increase in resale all across the board. East End did fairly well there. Montrose did not do as well as the Heights did. There were fewer, the prices have gotten much higher in Montrose and Westview, and so the number of sales declined. Look at the new construction, off 34% in area 16, basically. 34% reduction of new homes sold in 2017 compared to 2016. Resale market making up the difference there. Westview, same thing. While sales were up, the number of new home sales off 21%, is that the number? 21% there? Fairly significant reduction in new home sales in Area 17. The suburbs, if you were coming in, flying into Houston and considering Kingwood, the Woodlands, or Cinco Ranch, certainly I believe these numbers are impacted by what happened in Harvey. The Woodlands, which fared better in the media over the flooding area, didn't have near the reporting of flooding as Lake Houston did or as West Houston, actually saw a very nice jump, about 9.2% in the number of sales there. But compared to Cinco Ranch or Kingwood, they both experienced reductions in sales. Hard to sell a house that's flooded. Hard to sell a house that had 2 feet of water in it. Hard to sell a house when the street was flooded. The image of those areas are going to take a little bit longer to overcome. So I think they're comparable neighborhoods. You don't choose one over the other for any particular reason. I think if you're just relocating in, that you had choices there, and I think West Houston is going to continue to suffer to some degree, and I think Kingwood faces some of that same problem. So overall, HAR sales up, median price up. Every individual neighborhood, though, of course, is different there. Let's go on here. I might need my microphone. Okay. I think the thing to watch in 2018, and I'm not the economist again, is jobs. Jobs make up the impact of what's going to happen with homes, especially inside the 610 loop and inside the Beltway. And I do believe, like other economists, that we're going to have about 45,000 jobs in 2018, which is statistically about the same number that we had in 2017. If we look at the history and the bust and the boom sort of thing of just jobs alone, so if you're the economist, focus on the jobs report in Houston in March and in June, we'll see how well I'm doing over here. We had this great reduction in jobs in 2009, and we had these boom years tied to oil in 10, 11, 12, 13, where we got 80 to 118,000 jobs a year. No one's forecasting that we're going to have that kind of job growth in 2018. But if we have nice, steady growth like we experienced in 2018, we should be just fine of a balanced real estate market. Okay? So I'm predicting, and most of my predictions are going to be based on the fact that we're going to get about these 45,000 jobs. If people do not relocate here because of Harvey and because of the flooding issues, then that is the number one issue I think the city is going to have to address. I visit with Houston First all the time. What is the messaging? What are we doing over there? It's why we had Houston First at our annual sales meeting. They're going to have to do a good job of continuing to promote Houston as a resilient place to live, work, and play. Conventions have not slowed down by one convention. We've not had any cancellations as a result of flooding or anything of that nature, which I think has been a good indication that we've been able to recover relatively quickly in the media to other people who might be thinking about relocating here. So jobs, number one thing to kind of pay attention to. Interest rates are the next most important thing. Those of us, I was playing this little game yesterday. What were interest rates 10 years ago? What were they 20 years ago? What were they 30 years ago? And remember, in 1980, they were 16, 17, 18%. Just 10 years ago, interest rates were significantly higher than they have been in the last few years. And we have a group of population that thinks the world's going to be falling off, it's going to end when we go past 4% for interest rates. And we must prepare ourselves for 5% interest rates and 5.5% interest rates and higher. I don't think there's going to be these massive jumps, but we need to assume that, 4.5 by mid-year, 5.5 by the end of the year is going to be the norm for interest rates. They're not going to be at 3.75 any longer. That's not a number. And we've seen the jump relatively quick. Yes, Pat?
I was just going to tell you, they're already at 4.5.
Yeah, they're basically at 4.5 today. I mean, they're going to continue to rise, and we need to think 4.5, 5 is the number that we need to get used to, and then we'll see what happens after this year. But, look at interest rates and what they've done over the last 50 years. They've consistently been going basically down, and they're going to have to adjust and come back up. And just the reality of it is, the new norm is a higher interest rate. This is the price of oil over the last 70 or 80 years. And while it was about $8 to $10 a barrel there for 50 years, In many ways, what this chart is showing you is that oil today is still significantly higher than it was in the 80s or 90s or the turn of the century. And while it's not at $110 a barrel, the recovery from low oil was quicker this time than anyone anticipated. Oil rebounded much faster than people would have assumed even 18 months ago. And I believe oil will stabilize somewhere between $50 and $60 or $65 a barrel. Real estate does not like uncertainty. I tell people all the time, the worst thing that can happen for us is that if oil jumps to $80 one day and falls to $40 the next, my world goes on pause to figure out what the impact of that is. The best thing we can do is have stable oil prices, and they will adjust accordingly. And so I'm going to assume no major disruption in oil, and that we're somewhere around $60 a barrel, give or take a little bit there. And I think they can make money at $60 a barrel. And those that can't will get eaten up by those who can. But it's already higher than you think. So, jobs, interest rate, price of oil. I'm making some assumptions. 45,000 jobs, higher interest rates, stable oil. But in addition to that, we have other factors that are impacting our industry today. Certainly people are wondering the impact of the tax changes that have come. And I personally believe there's not going to be a significant impact one way or the other in Houston, Texas. People that I sell houses to are not buying a house because of their tax structure. I mean, that wasn't their determining factor. It may determine how high a value a house that people buy, but they weren't buying it for a tax strategy out there. They were buying it because they want to own a house. They believe in the long-term appreciation of houses. They believe that being their own owner is better than being a renter out there. And you've got to remember, in Houston and Harris County, 40% of all residents are renters. Less than 60% of the population in our county own a home. Okay? So I don't think we're impacting that many people by changes to the tax code. It will impact some people, but I don't think there's going to be a detrimental impact one way or the other. It may stimulate the economy. It may kick out more corporate earnings. It may cause some other positive impact that offsets anything negative from the restrictions and deductions now. And so I think we'll watch wages. We're very concerned about the jobs that come in. Are they going to be high-paying jobs? Or are they going to be low-paying jobs? Are they going to be $11 an hour? Or are they going to be $100,000 jobs? Wages are probably way more important to me than the impact necessarily of a particular tax deal one way or the other. So those are some factors there. We follow all the time the number of housing starts and these permits because my world is tied to supply and demand. So if we look, we've been talking about the number of sales, and as I mentioned, the sales to the right are at the highest they have ever been. Remember, we've never sold more houses than we have this last year. But we are not yet permitting new construction and new endeavors at the level we were in 2007, okay? We've not yet caught up. This is the permitting numbers for the greater city. And the left is 2007, about 42,000. Since the recession, we've not yet caught up as a city to the number of permits that we did 11 years ago. We're gaining momentum, but we're not there yet. Yet we continue to have a more desirable place to live. So the supply of new homes is not keeping up with the demand for new homes. Okay? Now, we've broken this out also to some degree of just the city of Houston. So that was a broad area. We're now talking about just in the city of Houston. These are the permitting numbers in here. And while we're picking up a little speed, we're talking about less than 5,000 permits for new construction in the city of Houston last year. Okay? New construction. It's pretty low number, I would think, for a city with a couple million people in it that have a high propensity for people to move here. So we watch permitting numbers. We're going to give you this little snippet. If you're not subscribing to the City of Houston's planning e-permit report, sign up for it, okay? You can just go online to the Houston Planning Department website and you can sign up for this report, and it will give you, every week it will send you this little snippet. And you'll be able to click on the little report here. And that little report's going to show you, not that one, what has happened, the permitting activity for the city of Houston over the past week. So this is every permit issued last week. This is as of February 5th. So I can look around here and see what's going on. So I will go and I will look, and so I am looking how much of this is Harvey related. Okay? I'm very curious myself. So I look over here at the bottom. This is Worthshire. This is over in Timber Grove. These flooded in Allison. They flooded in Tax Day. They flooded in Memorial Day. They flooded in Harvey. And here we are. We're going to go give them a permit to remodel these structures one more time, it looks like. But I can see what's going on. So this will tell you if there's a demolition in a neighborhood. It'll just kind of give you an impact of what's going on. Now, we're also going to give you this little snippet. You can find out what's happening with this exact permit at any given moment. What this matters to real estate is if I'm going to sell a house in 2018, I'm going to go and look and see what permits they've pulled over the last couple of years. They may not be so adamant about telling me if they flooded or not, but I'm going to be able to plug in their little address and pull up their permitting history for the last couple of years and see if they really did get a permit after their house. So maybe they flooded. Did they really get a permit and have the electrical checked out, the HVAC checked out? You know, is the structure still good or not? So you need to know how to verify the information. You'd be surprised how many houses try to sell with open permits and incomplete inspections all the time. So you should be able to verify this information by plugging in your little address and figuring out if they really in fact got a permit and re-inspected the HVAC that had 3 feet of water in it. I would want to know that if I were buying a house, and if you're a real estate agent, you should check this for everything that you're selling. You have a responsibility to show your buyer this information and verify if the information is correct or not. So we're big fans of verifying permitting information there. Okay, so permitting reports, kind of interesting. Now, what we have found interesting in the permitting side, because they're going to announce more of these permits, now we have an increased number of permits. It's to be expected after you flood a couple 100,000 houses, you're going to have some more permits. So this is showing me the number of remodeling permits historically, the last few years, and you can see in 2017, we had a fair amount of permitting activity as a result of Harvey, right? That's clearly a result of Harvey going on, which is a very good thing. I mean, we want to see people who had flooding issues get a permit, have those items inspected, put them back onto the market, and move on down the road. Inventory, supply and demand. This is the chart showing the normal demand is the pink line. The supply of homes inside the city of Houston is still significantly below. So this is what, in the marketplace, this is a seller's market. Supply, demand. Very high demand, very low supply, creates friction in the marketplace, creates the bidding war sort of thing that we've seen. We had the house in the Heights not too long ago, the corner of 14th. A normal bungalow, $525,000, seemed like a reasonable number. Multiple offer, took $100,000 more than the asking price for a bungalow in the Heights just last month. It's a little odd that we would be back to that sort of nature in January of 2018. It's because... No, it was a typical... No, we had Don Sanders' daughter bid on it. We didn't get it. But no, I mean, it's just a typical little bungalow. It had a cute yard. I mean, that's its redeeming quality. It's 1,200 square feet of beautifully remodeled, 2-bedroom, 2-bath bungalow. He didn't even get it. He was cheaper than the person that did get it. I know, he didn't get it. We did not think it was worth $625,000. But it's indicating that the marketplace is tightening up in certain areas, of course, and not otherwise. So people ask me every day, what is going to be the impact really of 2018? The things we want to talk about. There is truly a labor shortage in the city and surrounding county area. And it is definitely impacted the areas to the west in Kingwood. I have friends that flooded in Kingwood, and if you need sheetrock hung anytime soon, there are 6 to 9 month waiting lists for the sheetrocker in Kingwood. So Labor is a hot commodity. If you have a framer or a sheetrock or a tile guy, keep him. Don't let him get away from you, because once he goes, he may not come back. So we had a labor shortage. We have a labor shortage due to the flood. We have a labor shortage still not recovered from the recession. We have a labor shortage due to talk about immigration. All of those things are factors of labor and the tightening labor supply, which means it takes longer to get something done, which means it takes longer to build a new house, which increases the cost of construction of new homes there. Materials have gone up, but we verified with concrete people, roofing materials, steel materials, window suppliers. The average material is only up insignificantly, about 2 to 5%. They attribute, and none of it did one person attribute to Harvey. There wasn't a shortage of sheetrock which caused a spike in the cost of sheetrock. Concrete is a prime example. I'm not going to talk politics today, I promise. But if you are Mr. Trump and you are trying to protect American jobs, and there was cheaper concrete in South America, and you impose tariffs on concrete coming from South America, it increases the cost of concrete in Houston, okay? So the average concrete uses, today, you go buy concrete from a truck today, 20% of that concrete is filler from ash from a coal plant, okay? 20% of the concrete. The only one that uses pure concrete is the federal government, by their little codes, and they use it to build streets and roads and federal buildings. If you impose these strict tariffs, and the price of concrete and the price of steel is now competitive, the South American price is now the same price as it is in American concrete, the cost goes up. So the cost of all of these materials to protect American jobs, it's not a political statement, has caused the prices of raw materials coming into America are significantly higher than they were 2 years ago. Okay? I'm not going to get into the free market trade. I'm just telling you the cost of goods is going up. So if the labor is taking longer to build a house and the materials cost increase, and you continue with tariffs on those materials, you will have continual price increase, especially of new construction. To build the house, a 3,000 square foot house today, costs more than it did 1 year ago. Just the sheer cost of the labor and the materials. Okay? And then you add other factors. The city of Houston is talking about changing its development code. Nothing has been determined yet. Okay? So I'm not going to be able to say anything with any accuracy, but you're going to talk about, there will be increased development. There will be changes. I mean, I know there will be changes. There's no reason not to have some changes. We just don't know exactly what they're going to do. And then I go to all of these meetings, and everyone wants to talk about bond issues. They want to talk about getting all they can, which is a lovely idea, that if the county adds $3 billion, and Metro goes for $1 billion, and HISD goes for $1 billion, and the city goes for $1 billion. You all know these billions add up at some point, and we have to pay back that money over time. And the reason I mention it is it's going to cost the average taxpayer more money to fix some of these problems that we have been not addressing over time. And I think the numbers are fairly significant, especially to the lower, more affordable housing. You start adding $100 to $200 a month to the $200,000 tax bill, you are putting more and more people out of the ability to afford a home in Houston, Texas, when you already had so many other factors going in there also. So we want to show you a little bit about these changes and what they might do. So this is the current map of the flooding in Houston, Texas, and the surrounding area. We're going to try and micro here. And we have what is basically the 100-year floodplain and the 500-year floodplain. So what are we looking at here, Aaron? This is both?
FEMA data on the 500-year floodplain.
Let's look at just the 100-year floodplain. So here is the 100-year floodplain, and we have done a fairly good job of trying to raise houses and raise new construction out of the 100-year floodplain. The assumption with this 100-year floodplain, though, is that we have 12 to 13 inches of rainfall in 24 hours. That's what these maps were using as the data 20 and 30 years ago when they created the majority of this map structure. And in reality, we probably have been experiencing 18 inches of water, not 13 inches of water in that 24-inch period. So the current 100-year floodplain map is probably not indicative of what really is in the should be in the 100-year floodplain. Now, the data is out, the comment period, I believe, is over, and so there's going to be discussion about that amount of rainfall for a little period of time. But new maps are not going to kick out anytime soon. They are not going to be out in 2018. They are not going to be out in 2019. They probably are not going to be out in 2020. We're talking about, Costello yesterday is talking about 4 years for new flood maps. Maybe sooner, but they're not going to be out anytime soon. So if this assumption of rainfall in a certain period of time increases, we know, basic science, is that the 100-year floodplain is going to increase in size. Geography of it is going to increase. And then so you look at the 500-year floodplain, the same math would apply. So you look at the 100-year floodplain and then you add in the 500-year floodplain. It's why the conversation is about addressing items in the 500, because you're assuming the 500 is going to be the new 100 in a relatively short period of time. So it's an increase of a fair amount of land that we're going to be talking about. The red are impacted structures in our city and surrounding areas. So go back up just a little bit more, but I mean, you can see the impact is fairly equitably distributed across the region, and even as we zoom into the city of Houston, the thing about this storm and this rainfall event is that it took place all over. It impacted Bel Air and Cinco Ranch and Cypress and Kingwood and Galena Park and Pasadena. All of those areas had rainfall events. And let's remind ourselves one more time, we're all going to learn about watersheds. And all of this water to the left, that's on the west, is going to go to the east, and it's going to get to the Port of Houston and the Gulf of Mexico somehow. It's going to flow some way. It's either going to flow through a bayou, it's going to flow through a street, or it's going to flow through your yard. Okay? It's got to get out of there. There's no way that amount of rainfall increasing isn't going to continue to go a certain direction. And streets are designed to carry water. Let's just be clear. The bayous are not going to be the only place that carry water to the Port of Houston. Streets are going to have to deal with the drainage issue that we have. And we're going to have to do a better job of addressing drainage through our streets over time. So these are the areas, and so you must now start thinking about the 500-year floodplain. We're going to have a couple of other definites, but if you live in Houston, Texas, you should get flood insurance, okay? If you live in Houston, Texas, you should get flood insurance. If you're in the 100-year floodplain, you should have flood insurance. If you're in the 500-year floodplain, you should have flood insurance. If you're not in the 100 or the 500-year floodplain, you should have flood insurance. And if people, how many of you do not have flood insurance? I have people raise their hand all the time at these events. And I think that you have a car or a garage or something, you need flood insurance. If you're not in the floodplain, it's $417 or something. It is a very good investment to have flood insurance, because your street is going to flood, your apartment's going to flood, your car is going to flood from time to time in Houston, Texas. Okay? We're going to do a better job of explaining this in our industry also. The current regulations for our city is that you know, regardless of where you are, that you're going to be 1 foot higher than the crown of the street. And we're going to make the assumption that the crown is at the center of the street. It was designed that way. When they repave it many times, it may not always be exactly there, but the streets are designed to crown in the center, and the typical curb is 6 inches. There again, some things happen. Sometimes it's 2 inches above the crown, but the typical street today is the curb is at the crown. And if the grade is at the curb, should be, then your foundation is required to be 12 inches above that crown of the street. Today, I mean, that is the rule today. If you're in the 100-year floodplain, you would have to be higher. So in this foundation, we're showing we are the typical foundation of a slab house. We are using called net fill. You are pulling some dirt from your property and you are filling in underneath your slab, because your concrete perimeter beam is really about 30 inches. We're filling in with some dirt over there, and your typical concrete slab on a slab house is about 6 inches. That's how much concrete you really have underneath. There are some drilled piers in there, but in theory, your concrete is about 6 inches. We are talking in the regulatory world about not being able, what the typical person is doing is buying a lot and adding fill to their lot, raising their lot to a certain height, and then building a 12-inch foundation somewhere. And we're talking about not allowing the raising of any particular lots, okay? Because when you raise your lot and your next door neighbor is not raised, theoretically we're creating or adding to our flooding issues over there. There's discussions, no raising of lots. Not going to allow that at all. There's talk about no net fill. If you couldn't use any net fill like we've just discussed, and you had to replace all of this dirt just with concrete, theoretically, don't know if this is going to work or not, then you've increased the cost of the house fairly significant by the amount of concrete that is already rising in price to begin with, okay? That's a fairly expensive, and especially if we're talking about lower priced houses, GHBA's memo that they sent to the mayor yesterday is that the average 1,600 square foot house, if you went to this rule, added $36,000 to a 1,600 square foot house with a garage. Now, I'm not agreeing nor disagreeing with that number, but that's the number that GHBA provided to the Public Works Director, Costello, and the mayor. So I don't know if that's true, but I do know more concrete costs more than less concrete does. There is plenty of conversation going on in our world about not allowing that concrete and requiring pier and beam construction, okay? Fair amount of conversation going on even today on this topic or whatever. If you require pier and beam construction, there are a number of ways to do it. There are block and beam. The typical pier and beam of the houses that we build in the heights, that amount of concrete underneath the ground goes down 11 feet. That's how long that drilled pier is before it has some bell-bottom pier. And then you have another 24 inches of concrete and a 12-inch perimeter beam up there. And that would raise the house typically around 36 inches. But that foundation costs a fair amount of more money than the 6 inches of concrete that we had on the 12-inch high house. Okay? So if you require pier and beam construction across the city, regardless of where it is, you've increased the cost of houses fairly significant. And cities do this all the time. The city of Bel Air will not allow you to build that slab house. You must build this pier and beam house. But we would all probably agree here today that the city of Bel Air is fairly more affluent than the average homeowner in the city of Houston. Okay? It's an affluent neighborhood. And they're not building any $179,000 or $249,000 houses in Bel Air. They're building $1.2 and $1.5 million houses in Bel Air. And that cost increase can be passed off to that guy, but can it be passed off to everyone in our city? So nothing has been decided. You can still weigh in. There'll be ample opportunity for the community to weigh in on these sort of things. But I mean, there's a fair amount of conversations and recommendations for some changes. We know it's going to change. You know it's going to change. You just don't know exactly what it's going to change to. So we're talking about raising houses. So if you use, instead of the 100-year floodplain, the 500-year floodplain. Let's go back to the 100-year floodplain for just a moment on our analysis again. They're not explaining it very well. Your 1% chance of flooding in your 100 years, when you really calculate it, is a 26% chance of you flooding in your 30-year mortgage. In a 30-year period of time, you run the numbers, that's a 26% chance that you will flood if you're in the 100-year floodplain. And, you know, if you're in the 0.2 or 500-year floodplain, the number goes down, but I mean, it's still, your chance of flooding is not 1 out of 500, it's about 6% or so in a 30-year period of time. So, and those numbers are still using data that's out of whack. It's not using the appropriate amount of rainfall. And do anyone think that we're getting more rainfall or less rainfall in the future? In Gulf Coast regions, we're probably going to get more. The Gulf is warming up, the intensity of storms are rising, and the amount of rainfall being dropped on our dry land is greater than it has been in the past, and I predict that it will continue to intensify in the future. So we know that water is an issue. We know that Houston is going to flood. It's where's the flood water? What are we going to do with the flood water? And I do not want one new house built from today on to flood. okay? I want to do anything I could to influence any politician or anyone in the regulatory business to keep houses from flooding. But if the flood base level is really at 3 feet, I don't see the advantage to requiring houses to be 12 feet off the ground. Okay? It adds too much cost to some of those houses if it's not necessary. So we have to be reasonable about where we're going to implement these changes, and across the board changes may not be in the best interest of everyone in the city of Houston, because it may make it less affordable and it may not be needed in every area. So we'll see what happens. I don't think, like I say, I personally don't think anything's been decided yet, but I know that in any scenario, the foundations are going to be more expensive than they were in the past, okay? Which means new construction is going to be more expensive than it has in the past. So how are we going to deal with that as the rising cost of houses? And the mortgage side and the appraisal world only wants to look backwards. They rarely give you any credit for the fact that you spent more money than the guy did 6 months beforehand. So let's keep going. Where are we going next? So here is an issue that's transformative of our city. You don't know about the I-45 expansion and what's going on with that and how it will impact our city, not only in the next decade, but in the generations to come. You need to pay attention, because I think it does impact real estate, especially inside the 610 loop. This is I-45 coming down from the north area, from the airport. You're crossing around at 610, and instead of 45 going around like where the Pierce Elevated is now, 45 will follow the line of I-10, and then it will follow 59, and it will be on the east side of downtown. $7 billion project, $9 billion kind of immediate impact of economics over the region over time or whatever. Adjacent, to that construction is opportunities for the city and stakeholders to influence what would happen as a result of that. Some communities are going to be impacted. The overwhelming concept of this deal is connectivity. Okay? We're trying to reconnect as many of these neighborhoods that were divided by interstates of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So up here in the Heights, where we have the North Main crossing, there's an opportunity for a deck park of some nature, don't know what it would look like, which would connect back that area. So you basically would have park space up above, connecting North Main, the Brooksmith area to the near north side area. The interstate would be dropped down below. Same as you come around here, when you get to George R. Brown, this area, all of the interstate would be below grade, underneath. I know that they can address the flooding issue, because that always comes up. And then those streets would all be at grade, and we'd have another opportunity to connect the area, see where Discovery Green is, then the Convention Center, to the areas to the east of that towards BBVA Compass Stadium. And the area where the Pierce Elevated is elevated, there's an opportunity for that also to be below grade, to create more of a connection between the downtown business district and the midtown area. The Pierce Elevated were no longer there. The streets were all at grade. We would see a greater confluence and connectivity between those areas. If you tie in this expansion with hike and bike trails and walking trails and commuter rails and better metro transit, I think it's going to be totally impactful for all of these neighborhoods. People want walkability. We hear it over and over. They may not walk, but they want it walkable. So my neighborhood is very walkable. I don't walk to any of those things. I drive to them, but I want it to be more and more walkable. And I think that's what people are looking for. We must prepare for a denser city. We must understand that we can not only grow this direction, but with the infrastructure we have, we must grow this direction, and we must allow for greater density in the very near future to infill into these areas that have not been filled in. And so you're going to see a movement to change the code so that we can have greater density. Maybe we do it along transit corridors first. I don't know the answer. I just know that we're going to have to explore codes that allow for greater density and less restrictions on certain things like parking. So you're going to see that, and maybe it's in a targeted area, but it is the future. We're going to be a more populated city because we're going to get those jobs, remember? So these areas around 610, still the near north side, the east side, the area around Emancipation Avenue and all of those areas are prime opportunities for people to look at them with a new lens, okay? And we've been promoting these areas, and historically, those neighborhoods have not had flooding issues. And they've had minor street issues, they haven't had flooding issues. So you're gonna, I think, see greater movement into those particular neighborhoods. And then I think you'll see denser townhouse developments, and you'll see more condominium and high-rise living. It's an insignificant number of sales today. And we've got to find a way to create high-rises that do not start in the $1 million or $700 per square foot price point. They're going to have to start at a cheaper price point, and then you're going to have to put them in a cheaper area. The land is going to have to be cheaper. So you're going to go find condominiums in the east side along a rail corridor, and you're going to be able to price those things in the $200,000 to $300,000 price point. People will get out more. They'll use the hike and bike trails. They won't need their yard. And that's the future of the city. That's where it's going. Someone's going to always want a big yard. But how many millions of dollars are we going to spend after this last freeze replacing the plants and things in our yards? And someone's going to get tired of spending that money, and they're going to put that money into a bicycle, and they're going to buy something with less yard that doesn't freeze, and they're going to enjoy their city more. Someone's going to buy the yard, but plenty of people are going to choose not to put their money into replacing frozen plants twice a year. This is the impact of driverless cars, a projection. It's a disruptor into our world. If, in fact, we have 7,000 driverless cars by 2020, look at how the numbers would grow to 600,000 within 5 years, and 4.5 million just 10 years after that. The rise of Ubers, the rise of the Amazons, the rise of these disruptive forces can have a huge impact. It's one of the reasons I don't think we have to just keep building wider and wider and wider interstates. Things are going to change, and those things cost a lot of money, and they last a long time. When you need greater flexibility, even rail lines are not, they need some amount of flexibility, because people in the rail, we had amazing conversations the other day. This was just a conversation that was had with people at Metro. If you continue to put more and more commuter rails to Cinco Ranch and the Woodlands and Kingwood and all those areas, you're encouraging people to move to Cinco Ranch and Kingwood and the Woodlands, okay? The city has a fair amount of billions of dollars of infrastructure inside the 610 loop and the Beltway. To add more people out to Cinco Ranch, we have to build more water lines, we have to build more sewer lines, we've got to build a park, we've got to build a library, a police station, a fire station. We have plenty of those things inside the 610 loop. We're subsidizing the suburbs. You're intentionally keeping it cheaper, and you're not using your best resources, which are inside the area. Metro, in my opinion, should focus more on the service inside the area we already own, creating better transit inside the 610 loop, not more commuter rails or more commutes to the suburbs. Let's make it better so that all of you ride here on the bus, not people bringing in 1 million people from the suburbs into the central business district. Let's focus inside the 610 loop. Let's make it better. More people would ride the bus to dinner and ride the bus home or ride the bus to the zoo than do today if it were better, if it were cleaner, faster, cheaper, more people used it. There's safety in numbers. So don't just talk to me about Metro spending more money going to the airport. I only go to the airport 4 to 6 times a year. I go to the Museum of Fine Arts every week. I want to go to the Museum of Fine Arts easier. I don't want to go to the airport easier. I'll take the taxi to the airport if you make my commute to my office and to my grocery store and my restaurant easier. That's where people would focus on. So those are some thoughts there. That's kind of the overview I wanted to go. I wanted to leave some time for questions. So people always